But here's what he doesn't know. She's been coming to this small grocery store for weeks, not because it's convenient, but because watching his quiet acts of kindness reminds her of the man she fell in love with 20 years ago. And that extra change he's about to give her, that's not a mistake. That's the moment everything changes. This is the story of Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran who thought helping a struggling customer was just the right thing to do. He had no idea. It would expose a secret so powerful it could either destroy his carefully rebuilt life or prove that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can heal wounds that money and time couldn't touch. Sometimes broken hearts find their way back to each other through the hands of strangers who understand what it means to serve others. The morning fog rolled in from the Pacific, wrapping around the modest buildings of Seaside Grove like a gentle embrace. Inside Miller's Market, a family-owned grocery store that had served this coastal California town for 3 generations, the familiar sounds of commerce created a symphony of everyday life. The soft beeping of scanners, the rustle of paper bags, and the gentle murmur of conversations between neighbors who had known each other for decades painted a picture of community that felt increasingly rare in the modern world. Marcus Rodriguez moved through his morning routine with the practiced precision of someone who had learned that consistency could be a form of healing. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much but refused to let it harden his heart. His dark hair showed premature threads of silver at the temples, and his brown eyes held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond his years. The small scar above his left eyebrow and the slight limp in his right leg were the only visible reminders of his 3 tours in Afghanistan, though anyone who paid attention would notice how he always positioned himself where he could see all the entrances to any room. Behind the register at checkout lane 3, Marcus had found something he thought he'd lost forever: peace. The simple rhythm of scanning items, making small talk with customers, and ensuring everyone felt welcomed had become his meditation. He wore the same navy blue Miller's Market polo shirt every day, keeping it pressed and professional, a habit. From his military days that now served a different kind of service. The name tag reading Marcus was pinned perfectly straight, and he kept his workspace organized with military precision, every bag folded just so, every receipt handed over. With a genuine smile, if you watched Marcus carefully, really watched, you'd notice something remarkable about how he interacted with customers. He remembered Mrs. Chen always needed help carrying her groceries to the car because of her bad hip. He knew that teenage Tyler was saving for college and always looked for the best deals on his lunch items. He understood that the young mother, with 2 toddlers, was usually frazzled and needed patience, not judgment, when her children got restless in line. Marcus had an uncanny ability to see people's struggles and respond with exactly the kind of kindness they needed, even when they couldn't ask for it directly. Have you ever noticed how some people carry their pain quietly, transforming it into fuel for helping others? Marcus was one of those rare souls who had taken his own wounds and turned them into windows of empathy for everyone around him. The grocery store itself reflected the character of its community. Miller's Market wasn't the biggest or the most modern store in the area, but it was the one where people chose to shop because they valued relationships over convenience. The aisles were narrow but well organized. The produce section featured local farms, and the deli counter was run by Maria Santos, who had been making the best sandwiches in town for 15 years. The bulletin board near the entrance was covered with local announcements, thank you notes from customers, and photos from community events the store had sponsored over the years. In the express lane next to Marcus, Jennifer Walsh worked with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. At 28, she was working her way through nursing school while supporting her younger brother. Her blonde hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she had the focused energy of someone with too many responsibilities and not enough hours in the day. Jennifer was good at her job, fast and accurate, but she approached customer service as a task to be completed rather than an opportunity for connection. Near the customer service desk, Harold Patterson restocked shelves. With methodical care, at 62, Mr. Harold had been with Miller's Market for 12 years, ever since his wife passed away, and he needed something to fill the empty hours. His grey beard was always neatly trimmed, his flannel shirts always clean, but worn soft. From years of washing, he moved slowly but deliberately, and had become something of a grandfather figure to the younger employees. Harold had a way of appearing whenever someone needed an extra hand or a word of encouragement, as if he had developed a sixth sense for when his quiet wisdom was needed most. The early morning shift brought its own particular rhythm. Commuters grabbed coffee and breakfast items on their way to work in the larger cities up the coast. Retirees came in for their daily newspapers and small shopping lists, treating the trip as much about social interaction as necessity. Young mothers with strollers navigated the aisles, often accompanied by toddlers who were fascinated by everything they saw. Each type of customer brought their own energy to the store, and Marcus had learned to read the mood and needs of each person who approached his register. This Tuesday morning felt different somehow, though Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on why. The fog seemed thicker than usual, creating an atmosphere of quiet intimacy that made voices sound softer and movements more deliberate. The usual morning rush had a gentler quality, as if the weather was encouraging everyone to move. A little slower, speak a little more kindly. Around 8:30, Marcus noticed a woman he hadn't seen before browsing the produce section. She moved with careful deliberation, examining tomatoes and selecting vegetables with the kind of attention that suggested cooking was more than just a necessity for her. She was probably in her early 40s, with auburn hair that caught the fluorescent lighting in interesting ways. Her clothes were well made, but not flashy, the kind of understated elegance that spoke of quality rather than trying to impress. There was something about her posture, a careful composure that suggested she was used to being observed but preferred not to be. What struck Marcus most was the way she interacted with other customers. When an elderly man dropped his cane near the apple display, she immediately moved to help him retrieve it, engaging him in brief but warm conversation about which apples made the best pie. When a young mother was struggling to manage her shopping list while keeping her toddler entertained, the woman quietly handed the child a small banana, asking the mother's permission with a smile before offering the distraction. These small acts of consideration reminded Marcus of his own approach to customer service, and he found himself curious about this stranger who seemed to understand that kindness was always a choice, never an obligation. She moved through the store with purpose but without hurry, as if she was savoring the simple pleasure of being around people going about their daily lives. As the morning progressed, Marcus served his regular customers with his usual attention and care. He helped Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman from his neighborhood who always paid with exact change counted from a small coin purse. He chatted with Jim Patterson about the weather and the upcoming high school football season. He patiently waited while Sarah Mitchell's 3-year-old counted out pennies to buy a pack of gum, treating the transaction with the same seriousness the child brought to it. But throughout these interactions, Marcus found his attention occasionally drifting to the woman with auburn hair. She had moved from produce to the bakery section, where she spent considerable time examining fresh bread before selecting a loaf of sourdough. She picked up milk from the dairy case, spent time reading labels in the canned goods aisle, and approached each selection with thoughtful consideration. There was something about her careful attention to her shopping that suggested this wasn't routine for her. She held items a moment longer than necessary, as if appreciating the simple act of choosing what she wanted. When she smiled at a baby in a shopping cart, her whole face transformed with genuine warmth. When she paused to read a community notice on the bulletin board about a local fundraiser for a family whose house had burned down, Marcus saw her make a note in her phone, as if planning to contribute. Have you ever watched someone and sensed that they carried stories you'd like to hear? This woman had that quality of depth that made Marcus think there were layers to her life that would surprise most people who met her casually. The morning continued its gentle rhythm. The fog began to lift slightly, allowing more natural light to filter through the windows. The store filled with the comfortable bustle of a community going about its daily business. Children pointed excitedly at colorful cereal boxes. Teenagers debated snack choices with the seriousness of major life decisions. Adults navigated their shopping lists while catching up with neighbors they hadn't seen in a few days. Around 10:15, the woman with auburn hair finally approached Marcus's register. She had selected her items carefully: fresh vegetables, quality bread, organic milk, a few pantry staples, and a small bouquet of flowers that she had picked from the display near the entrance. Her shopping suggested someone who cooked thoughtfully and appreciated simple pleasures. "Good morning," Marcus said warmly, beginning to scan her items with his usual care. Up close, he could see that her eyes were green with flecks of gold, and that she had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were sharing a pleasant secret. "Good morning," she replied, and her voice carried a hint of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Not an accent exactly, but a careful way of speaking that suggested she was used to choosing her words thoughtfully. As Marcus scanned each item, he found himself taking extra care with the produce, making sure nothing got bruised in the bag. He wrapped the flowers in tissue paper without being asked, the kind of small gesture that had become second nature to him. When he reached for the bread, he positioned it carefully on top of everything else to prevent it from getting crushed. "That's beautiful sourdough," Marcus commented. "Mrs. Peterson makes it fresh every morning. She's been perfecting that recipe for 30 years. It smells wonderful," the woman replied. "There's something special about bread that's made with care, isn't there? You can taste the difference." Marcus nodded, appreciating how she understood the value of craftsmanship. "Mrs. Peterson says the secret is in the patience. Good bread can't be rushed." "Patience is such an undervalued quality these days," the woman said thoughtfully. "Everything seems designed for speed rather than meaning." The comment struck Marcus as particularly insightful. In his military service, he had learned that the most important things, building trust with local communities, developing reliable intelligence, keeping his soldiers safe, all required patience and careful attention to details that others might overlook. As he tallied her total, Marcus noticed the woman counting bills from her wallet with careful attention. She had enough money, but not by much, and he sensed that every purchase was considered carefully within a budget that didn't allow for impulse buying. There was no shame in her careful counting, just the practical attention of someone who respected the value of money and spent it thoughtfully. The total came to $47.63. The woman handed him 2 20s and a $10 bill, $50 even. As Marcus reached for the register to make change, he found himself thinking about how carefully she had selected each item, how much consideration had gone into her shopping, how her small acts of kindness in the store had reminded him of the best parts of human nature. Sometimes the smallest decisions reveal the biggest truths about who we are. In that moment, Marcus made a choice that felt completely natural, though he would later realize it changed everything. Instead of giving her the correct change of $2.37, he handed her $3.37. "Here's your change," he said simply, placing the extra dollar bill with the rest of the money in her palm. The woman looked down at the money in her hand, then back up at Marcus with surprise. "I think you've given me too much," she said. Gently, Marcus met her eyes and saw something there that made his decision feel even more right. "Sometimes we all need a little extra help," he said quietly. "Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood gesture." For a moment, the woman simply looked at him, and Marcus saw emotions flicker across her face that he couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also something deeper. Gratitude, perhaps, but mixed with something that looked almost like recognition. "Thank you," she said finally, and her voice carried a weight that suggested those two words meant more than they usually did. "That's very kind of you. Have a wonderful day," Marcus replied, meaning it completely. As the woman gathered her bags and turned to leave, Marcus watched her pause near the store entrance. She looked back toward his register for just a moment, as if memorizing something important. Then she walked out into the lifting fog, leaving Marcus with the strangest feeling that this simple transaction had been anything but simple. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman standing outside his store, carefully placing the extra $1 in her wallet, was Catherine Lawson. What he couldn't have imagined was that 20 years ago she had been Catherine Mitchell, married to David Lawson, the CEO of Lawson Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies on the West Coast. What he had no way of knowing was that their divorce had been final for exactly 6 months, and that she had been living quietly in Seaside Grove, trying to rediscover who she was when she wasn't defined by wealth and social expectations. And what neither of them realized was that this moment of simple human kindness, this small gesture from a veteran who understood service and a woman who was learning to value authenticity over appearance, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, connection, and the possibility of healing old wounds through new forms of love. Catherine Lawson walked slowly to her car, the morning fog still clinging to the coastal air like a soft blanket. The extra $1 bill felt warm in her palm, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented. In her previous life as the wife of David Lawson, she had been surrounded by calculated gestures, strategic kindnesses designed to impress or manipulate. This simple act from a grocery store cashier who didn't know her name or her history felt revolutionary in its authenticity. She sat in her modest Honda Civic, a car that would have horrified her social circle from her married life, and thought about the careful way the cashier had wrapped her flowers, the genuine warmth in his voice when he talked about Mrs. Peterson's bread. There had been something in his eyes, a depth that spoke of someone who understood both suffering and service. The small scar above his eyebrow and the precise way he moved suggested military experience, and Catherine found herself wondering what stories lay behind his quiet kindness. For 6 months, Catherine had been living in a small rented cottage, 3 blocks from the ocean, learning to navigate a world where her value wasn't determined by her husband's success or her ability to host perfect dinner parties. The divorce from David had been devastating, not just because of the betrayal and public humiliation, but because it had forced her to confront how completely she had lost herself in trying to be the perfect corporate wife. The cottage was nothing like the sprawling estate she had shared with David, but it was hers in a way that mansion had never been. She had chosen every piece of furniture herself, painted the walls colors that made her happy, and planted a small garden where she grew herbs and vegetables. For the first time in decades, she was making decisions based on what she wanted rather than what was expected of her. Miller's Market had become part of her new routine, not because it was the most convenient grocery store, but because there was something about the atmosphere that felt healing. The genuine interactions between staff and customers, the community bulletin board filled with real needs and celebrations, the way people took time to actually see each other, all of it reminded her of the values she had grown up with before. Wealth and social status had complicated everything, Catherine had grown up in a middle-class family in Oregon, where her father worked as a high school principal and her mother taught elementary school. Their dinner table conversations had been about students who needed extra help, community challenges that required creative solutions, and the simple satisfaction of making a positive difference in people's lives. Those values had shaped Catherine's early adulthood, when she worked as a social worker, helping families navigate crisis situations. Meeting David Lawson had changed everything. He was charismatic, successful, and convinced that they could build something extraordinary together. In the early years of their marriage, Catherine had tried to use her position to support meaningful causes, organizing charity events and serving on non-profit boards. But gradually, the demands of being a CEO's wife had consumed more and more of her energy, until she found herself planning dinner parties to impress potential business partners rather than working directly with people who needed help. The breaking point had come when she discovered David's affair with his assistant, a betrayal that was particularly devastating because Catherine had sacrificed so much of herself to support his career. The divorce proceedings had been ugly and public, with David's legal team working to minimize her settlement by painting her as a woman who had contributed nothing to his success. The media attention had been brutal, portraying her as another entitled ex-wife, trying to claim more than she deserved. But Catherine had surprised everyone, including herself, by refusing to fight for half of David's fortune. Instead, she had taken enough money to live modestly and start over, walking away from the social status and material comfort that had defined her life for 20 years. The decision had shocked David, confused their former friends, and liberated Catherine in ways she was still discovering. Living in Seaside Grove had been a revelation. Without the pressure to maintain appearances or navigate complex social hierarchies, Catherine was rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried for decades. She volunteered at the local literacy center, helping adults learn to read. She joined a community garden project that provided fresh vegetables for families in need. She took long walks on the beach and remembered what it felt like to be alone with her thoughts without feeling lonely. The cashier's simple kindness had touched something deep in Catherine's heart because it reminded her of the person she used to be and the person she was trying to become again. In her marriage to David, every gesture had carried subtext. Every kindness had been part of a larger strategy. But the extra dollar from a stranger who gained nothing from the gesture felt pure in a way that made her remember what authentic human connection could feel like. Catherine drove home through the narrow streets of Seaside Grove, past the small craftsman houses with their well-tended gardens and the coffee shop where she had become a regular customer. The town had a rhythm that felt completely different from the frantic pace of her former life. People walked slower, took time to chat with neighbors, and seemed to value presence over productivity. Her cottage sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees that provided shade in the summer and a canopy of gold in the fall. The front porch was small but welcoming, with 2 chairs where Catherine often sat in the evenings, reading or simply watching the world go by. The garden she had planted was thriving, producing tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that brought her a satisfaction she had never found in any of the elaborate landscapes that professional designers had created for her former home. Inside, the cottage reflected Catherine's rediscovered sense of self. The living room was painted a warm yellow that reminded her of sunshine, with comfortable furniture chosen for enjoyment rather than impression. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with novels she was finally having time to read, and biographies of people who had lived meaningful lives. The kitchen was small but efficient, where Catherine had been relearning to cook, finding joy in preparing simple meals with fresh ingredients. As Catherine put away her groceries, she found herself thinking, about the cashier's hands as he carefully arranged her items in the bags. They were working hands, competent and gentle, with small scars that spoke of experience beyond retail work. The way he had positioned her bread to protect it from damage, the care he had taken with her flowers, the genuine warmth in his voice. When he talked about Mrs. Peterson's baking, all of it suggested someone who understood that small gestures could carry large meanings. Catherine made herself tea and sat at her kitchen table, looking out at her garden where morning glories climbed. A wooden trellis she had built herself. The extra dollar bill sat on the table in front of her, and she realized it had become a symbol of something she had been missing without fully understanding what it was. The experience of being seen and valued by someone who expected nothing in return. In her marriage to David, Catherine's worth had always been tied to her ability to enhance his success. She had been beautiful at social functions, charming to potential clients, sophisticated in her charitable work, always performing a version of herself that served his ambitions. Even their most intimate moments had carried undertones of strategy, as if everything about their relationship existed to support the larger project of David's career. The divorce had stripped away all of those external validations, leaving Catherine to confront the question of who she was when she wasn't being useful to someone else's dreams. The process had been terrifying and liberating in equal measure. For the first time in decades, she was making choices based on her own values rather than someone else's expectations. Working at the literacy center had reconnected Catherine with the satisfaction of service that had drawn her to social work. In her youth, her students were adults who had fallen through educational cracks, people who had managed to build lives and raise families while carrying the secret shame of not being able to read. Helping them discover the power of literacy was reminding Catherine of her own capacity to make a meaningful difference in individual lives. The community garden project had introduced her to neighbors who valued her contributions without knowing or caring about her past. Maria, a retired teacher who organized the volunteer schedule, appreciated Catherine's organizational skills. Roberto, a local handyman who maintained the tools, respected her willingness to get her hands dirty. The families who received fresh vegetables knew her simply as someone who cared about their well-being. These relationships were teaching Catherine what it felt like to be valued for who she was rather than what she represented. The grocery store cashier's kindness felt like another piece of this puzzle, a reminder that authentic human connection was possible when both people approached each other without agenda or pretense. Catherine realized she didn't even know the cashier's name, though she had noticed his name tag read Marcus. She wondered about his story, what had brought him to Seaside Grove, what experiences had shaped his obvious capacity for empathy. The way he moved suggested military training, and his careful attention to customer needs spoke of someone who understood service as something deeper than just completing transactions. As the morning fog lifted and sunlight filled her kitchen, Catherine found herself planning to return to Miller's Market soon, not because she needed groceries, but because she wanted to experience again the simple pleasure of being treated with kindness by someone who asked for nothing in return. In a world where every interaction seemed to carry hidden agendas, Marcus represented something rare and valuable, genuine human decency. Catherine had learned through her divorce that healing required more than just removing yourself from harmful situations. It also required actively seeking out experiences that reminded you of your own worth and the possibility of authentic connection. The cashier's kindness had been a gift she hadn't expected, and she found herself grateful for the reminder that there were still people in the world who chose compassion over calculation. She spent the afternoon working in her garden, tending to plants that would never grace magazine covers but brought her deep satisfaction to nurture. As she worked, she thought about the different ways people could serve others, how Marcus's careful attention to customers was its own form of ministry, how small gestures of consideration could create ripples of goodness that extended far beyond their immediate impact. When evening came, Catherine sat on her front porch with a cup of tea, watching neighbors walk their dogs and children ride bicycles in the fading light. The extra dollar bill was still in her wallet, but its value had already been multiplied beyond measure. It had reminded her that kindness was a choice available to everyone, that service didn't require grand gestures or perfect circumstances, and that sometimes the most meaningful connections happened between strangers who simply chose to see the best in each other. Tomorrow, Catherine decided, she would find a way to pay forward the kindness she had received, not because she owed Marcus anything, but because his simple gesture had reminded her of the person she wanted to be, someone who chose compassion over self-protection, generosity over calculation, and authentic connection over safe distance. As stars appeared in the coastal sky, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the quiet confidence that came from knowing she was exactly where she was, supposed to be, becoming exactly who she was meant to become. The following Wednesday morning brought Marcus to work, with the same steady routine that had anchored his life for the past 18 months. He arrived at Miller's Market at 6:30, 30 minutes before his shift officially began, using the extra time to organize his workspace and mentally prepare for the day ahead. This early morning ritual had become essential to his well-being, a buffer zone between sleep and the demands of interacting with dozens of people throughout the day. Marcus unlocked his register with practiced efficiency, checking that everything was properly stocked and positioned. The receipt paper was loaded correctly, the bags were folded and ready, the small basket of mints and hand sanitizer was refilled. These details mattered to him in ways that might seem excessive to others, but Marcus had learned that controlling the small things helped him manage the larger anxieties that still sometimes caught him off guard. The morning light filtered through the store's windows differently than it had the previous week. Instead of fog, today brought clear skies that promised warmth later in the day. Marcus could see the ocean in the distance through the windows, a view that never failed to remind him of why he had chosen Seaside Grove as his place to rebuild his life after leaving the army. Marcus had arrived in this coastal town 2 years ago with nothing but a duffel bag, a modest disability check, and a recommendation letter from his former commanding officer. The transition from military service to civilian life had been more difficult than he had anticipated. The structure and purpose that had defined his adult life had disappeared overnight, leaving him adrift in a world that seemed to move too fast and care too little about the things that had once mattered to him most. The nightmares had been the worst part. Not just the obvious trauma from combat experiences, though those memories certainly haunted him, but also the deeper wound of feeling like he no longer had a mission worth pursuing. In Afghanistan, every day had carried weight and meaning, even when the circumstances were dangerous or frustrating. Back home, civilian life had felt trivial and disconnected from anything that mattered. Miller's Market had saved him in ways he was still discovering. The job itself wasn't complicated, but it provided something Marcus desperately needed, the opportunity to serve others in small but meaningful ways. Every customer interaction was a chance to practice the values that had drawn him to military service in the first place, the belief that taking care of others was the highest form of purpose. Owen Miller, the store's owner and grandson of its founder, had hired Marcus, despite his lack of retail experience, because he recognized something valuable in the veteran's character. Owen was in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered hands that came from decades of physical work. He had built Miller's Market into a community institution by prioritizing relationships over profit margins, and he valued employees who understood that customer service was really about human connection. "I don't need someone who can just run a register," Owen had told Marcus during his interview. "I need someone who understands that every person who walks through that door is carrying their own story, their own struggles, their own hopes. If you can see that and respond with kindness, everything else can be taught." Marcus had proven Owen's instincts correct. Within months, customers were specifically choosing his checkout line, drawn by his patient attention and genuine warmth. He remembered names, asked about sick relatives, and celebrated small victories with people he had known for only a few minutes. The work had become a form of therapy, helping Marcus rediscover his capacity for positive impact in a world that had seemed indifferent to his contributions. The other employees had welcomed Marcus with the easy acceptance that characterized the store's culture. Jennifer Walsh, despite her focus on efficiency over connection, respected Marcus's work ethic and appreciated how his patient approach with difficult customers made everyone's job easier. Harold Patterson had become something of a mentor, sharing the wisdom that came from decades of observing human nature and understanding how small gestures could create large impacts. Maria Santos, who managed the deli counter, had taken Marcus under her wing during his first weeks at the store. She was in her 40s with 3 children and the kind of practical wisdom that came from juggling multiple responsibilities with grace. Maria had recognized the signs of someone struggling to find their place in the world, and she had made sure Marcus felt included in the informal family that existed among the store's employees. "This job isn't about groceries," Maria had told him during one of their break-time conversations. "It's about being present for people during the ordinary moments of their lives. That's when they need kindness the most, when they're just trying to get through another day." Marcus had taken Maria's words to heart, developing his own philosophy of customer service that went far beyond completing transactions. He studied people's faces as they approached his register, looking for signs of stress, fatigue, or sadness that might indicate someone who needed extra patience or a gentle word. He noticed when regular customers seemed different than usual, when their usual chatty demeanor gave way to distraction, or their careful shopping habits suggested financial stress. The woman with auburn hair had been on Marcus's mind more than he cared to admit since their interaction the previous Tuesday. There had been something about her careful attention to her purchases, her small acts of kindness toward other customers, and her gracious response to his extra change that had stayed with him. He found himself watching for her return, curious about her story, and hoping she had felt truly welcomed to the community. Thursday morning brought the usual parade of familiar faces. Mrs. Chen arrived with her carefully organized shopping list and her stories about her grandchildren's latest achievements. Tyler, the high school student saving for college, bought his lunch with coins counted from a jar, and Marcus made sure to mention that the store was hiring part-time help if he was interested in earning money faster. The young mother with twin toddlers came through looking frazzled as always, and Marcus engaged the children in conversation about their favorite cartoon characters while processing her purchases with extra care. Around 10:15, Marcus noticed the auburn-haired woman enter the store again. She moved with the same thoughtful pace he remembered, examining produce with careful attention and taking time to read labels on items she was considering. Today, she was dressed in jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out the color of her eyes, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that suggested she was comfortable in her own skin. Marcus watched her interactions with other customers and store employees, noting the same pattern of considerate behavior he had observed during her previous visit. When an elderly man struggled to reach a box of cereal on a high shelf, She quietly helped him without being asked. When she accidentally bumped into someone's cart while turning a corner, she apologized with genuine concern and asked if everything was all right. These weren't calculated gestures designed to impress anyone. They were the automatic responses of someone who had been raised to consider others' needs. What Marcus found most intriguing was how the woman seemed to be observing the store and its customers with the same careful attention he brought to his work. She noticed when Maria needed help at the deli counter and patiently waited her turn without complaint. She stepped aside to let someone with only a few items go ahead of her. In the bakery line, she made eye contact with employees and thanked them for their assistance with genuine warmth. There was something about her behavior that reminded Marcus of himself when he had first arrived in Seaside Grove, someone taking careful measure of a new community and trying to understand where they might fit in. The thought that she might be new to the area made him feel protective in a way he couldn't quite explain, as if he understood from personal experience how vulnerable it felt to start over in an unfamiliar place. When the woman approached his register for the second time, Marcus felt his pulse quicken slightly. He had been hoping she would choose his line again, though he couldn't articulate exactly why her approval mattered to him. She had selected fewer items this time. Fresh flowers, a bottle of wine, ingredients for what looked like a home-cooked meal for 1 or 2 people. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice carrying genuine pleasure at seeing her again. "Welcome back." "Good morning," she replied, and Marcus caught the hint of a smile that suggested she was pleased to be remembered. "It's becoming my favorite grocery store." "Owen will be happy to hear that," Marcus said, beginning to scan her items. "He's worked hard to make this place feel like part of the community rather than just a business." "It shows," the woman said. "There's something special about places where people actually see each other, isn't there?" Marcus nodded, appreciating how she had articulated something he felt but had never quite put into words. "I think we all need places where we can just be ourselves without pretense." "That's beautifully said," the woman replied, and Marcus heard something in her voice that suggested his words had resonated with personal experience. As Marcus carefully bagged her items, he found himself taking even more care than usual. The flowers were wrapped in tissue paper and positioned so they wouldn't be crushed. The wine bottle was secured between softer items to prevent breakage. The produce was handled gently and placed where it wouldn't be damaged by heavier purchases. "You must cook," Marcus observed, noting the quality of ingredients she had selected. "These look like they're for something special." "I'm relearning how to cook for myself," the woman said, and there was something in her tone that suggested this was more significant than it might sound. "It's amazing how satisfying it can be to prepare a meal with care and attention." Marcus understood exactly what she meant. Since moving to Seaside Grove, he had discovered the meditative pleasure of cooking simple meals in his small apartment, taking time to appreciate flavors and textures in ways he had never bothered with during his military service or in the chaotic months immediately following his discharge. "There's something grounding about working with your hands," Marcus agreed. "Whether it's cooking or gardening or any kind of craft, I think we need activities that connect us to the physical world." The woman looked at him with interest, as if surprised to encounter such thoughtfulness in casual conversation. "Do you garden?" she asked. "I'm trying to," Marcus admitted. "I have a small plot behind my apartment, but I'm still learning what grows well here. The climate is different from where I grew up." "Where are you from originally?" the woman asked, then immediately looked concerned. "I'm sorry, that's probably too personal a question for someone you barely know." "Not at all," Marcus said, touched by her consideration. "I grew up in Colorado, in a small mountain town, very different from coastal California, but I'm learning to appreciate the ocean." "It takes time to feel at home in a new place," the woman said. And again, Marcus heard the voice of personal experience. But there's something healing about being near the water, isn't there? Marcus nodded, thinking about the long walks on the beach that had become essential to his mental health, the way the sound of waves could quiet the restless thoughts that sometimes kept him awake at night. The ocean has a way of putting things in perspective, he said. As Marcus calculated her total, he noticed the woman counting bills in her wallet with the same careful attention he had observed the previous week. She had enough money, but her deliberate budgeting suggested someone who valued financial responsibility and made thoughtful choices about spending. The total came to $32.48. The woman handed him two 20s, $40 even. As Marcus reached for the register to make change, he found himself thinking about their conversation, about cooking and gardening, about starting over in new places and finding healing near the water. This woman understood things about rebuilding your life that most people never had to learn. Once again, Marcus made a choice that felt completely natural. Instead of giving her the correct change of $7.52, he handed her $8.52, including an extra dollar bill with the rest of the money. "Here's your change," he said simply, meeting her eyes with quiet confidence. The woman looked down at the money in her hand, then back up at Marcus with an expression that was harder to read this time. There was still surprise, but also something that looked like recognition, as if she was beginning to understand something about his character that went beyond surface impressions. "This is too much again," she said gently, but without the uncertainty she had shown the previous week. "Consider it a welcome to cooking for yourself celebration," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Everyone should be encouraged to take good care of themselves." The woman studied his face for a moment, and Marcus felt like she was seeing him more clearly than most people bothered to look. "Thank you," she said finally. "Your kindness means more than you probably realize." "Have a wonderful day," Marcus replied, meaning it completely. "I hope your cooking experiment turns out perfectly." As the woman gathered her bags and turned to leave, she paused for a moment and looked back at Marcus. "I'm Catherine, by the way," she said. "I realized I should probably introduce myself since I seem to be becoming a regular customer." "I'm Marcus," he replied, touched that she had chosen to share her name. "It's very nice to meet you properly, Catherine." "It's nice to meet you too, Marcus," Catherine said, and the way she used his name made it sound like she was committing it to memory. "I'll see you soon." Marcus watched Catherine leave the store, noting how she moved with more confidence than she had the previous week, as if their brief conversations had helped her feel more at home in the community. He realized he was looking forward to her next visit, curious to learn more about her story and hopeful that his small gestures of kindness were making her transition to Seaside Grove a little easier. What Marcus didn't know was that Catherine was walking to her car with her heart beating faster than usual, not because of the extra dollar, but because of the connection she felt with this thoughtful veteran who seemed to understand things about starting over that most people never had to learn. What he couldn't have imagined was that Catherine was beginning to see in Marcus qualities that reminded her of the person she had been before her marriage to David and the person she was trying to become again. And what neither of them realized was that their growing friendship was about to be complicated by revelations that would test everything they were beginning to believe about each other and themselves. The following Monday brought an unexpected visitor to Miller's Market. Catherine had been planning her usual mid-morning shopping trip when she received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and entirely unwelcome. "Mrs. Lawson, this is Jessica Martinez from the Chronicle Business section. We're running a follow-up story on prominent local divorces and their economic impact. We'd like to comment on your current living situation and how you're managing financially after walking away from the Lawson fortune." Catherine felt her stomach and drop. 6 months of peaceful anonymity in Seaside Grove, 6 months of being simply Catherine, who volunteered at the literacy centre and tended her garden, was about to be shattered by the very publicity she had moved here to escape. "I have no comment," Catherine said firmly. "Please don't contact me again. We understand you're living quite modestly now," the reporter continued, ignoring Catherine's request. "Shopping at discount stores, driving an older vehicle. Some people are wondering if you're having second thoughts about turning down a larger settlement." Catherine ended the call without responding, but the damage was already done. Her hands were shaking as she realized that her carefully constructed new life was about to become public knowledge. The peace she had found in Seaside Grove, the relationships she was building based on who she was rather than who she had been married to, all of it was at risk. She decided to go to Miller's Market anyway, needing the normalcy of her routine more than ever. But as Catherine drove through the familiar streets of her adopted hometown, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to lose everything she had worked so hard to build. Marcus was restocking the impulse buy items near his register when he noticed Catherine enter the store. Even from across the market, he could see that something was different about her today. Her usual calm confidence had been replaced by a tension that was visible in her posture and the way she moved through the aisles without her typical thoughtful pace. He watched as Catherine selected items with less care than usual, clearly distracted by whatever was troubling her. When she paused in the produce section, staring at tomatoes without really seeing them, Marcus felt a protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. This woman who had brought such gentle energy to his workplace was obviously struggling with something significant. Catherine's shopping trip felt different today. The simple pleasure she had found in selecting ingredients and planning meals was overshadowed by anxiety about her future in this community. Would people treat her differently once they knew about her past? Would the relationships she was building survive the revelation that she was the ex-wife of a prominent CEO? Would Marcus's kindness feel different if he knew she could afford to buy the entire store? When Catherine finally approached Marcus's register, he immediately noticed the strain around her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly as she placed items on the conveyor belt. Her usual warm greeting was replaced by a distracted nod, and she seemed to be lost in thoughts that were clearly troubling her. "Good morning, Catherine," Marcus said gently, using her name with the same care he always showed. "How are you today?" "I'm fine," Catherine replied automatically, then seemed to realize how unconvincing she sounded. "Actually, I'm having a difficult morning. I'm sorry if I seem distracted." Marcus began scanning her items with even more attention than usual, sensing that she needed extra care today. "Sometimes difficult mornings have a way of working themselves out," he said quietly. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Catherine looked up at him in surprise. In her former life, people had offered help constantly, but it was always because they wanted something in return, access to David or business connections or social advantages. Marcus's offer felt completely genuine, motivated by nothing more than human kindness. "That's very thoughtful of you," Catherine said, and Marcus heard the emotion in her voice that she was trying to control. "I think I just need to remember that sometimes life throws unexpected challenges at us, and we have to find the strength to handle them with grace." "That sounds like the voice of experience," Marcus observed, continuing to scan her items with careful attention. "Military service taught me that you can survive almost anything if you take it one day at a time and remember what's really important." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at Marcus's words. Here was someone who understood adversity from personal experience, someone who had found ways to rebuild and serve others despite whatever challenges he had faced. His perspective was exactly what she needed to hear. "You were in the military?" Catherine asked, grateful for the distraction from her own worries. 3 tours in Afghanistan, Marcus said simply. It teaches you a lot about resilience and what actually matters in life. Thank you for your service, Catherine said, and Marcus could tell she meant it completely. It must have been difficult to transition back to civilian life. It was, Marcus admitted, but I've learned that sometimes when one chapter of your life ends, it creates space for something you didn't know you needed. This job, this community, it's given me a sense of purpose I thought I'd lost. Catherine felt something shift inside her chest as she listened to Marcus talk about rebuilding his life with such quiet dignity. Here was someone who had faced the challenge of starting over and found ways to create meaning and connection in unexpected places. If Marcus could survive whatever had brought him to Seaside Grove and build something beautiful from it, perhaps she could weather whatever storm was coming. That's a beautiful way to think about change, Catherine said. Sometimes it takes courage to let go of one identity and trust that you can create something better. Marcus finished scanning her items and began bagging them with his usual care. But today, he found himself paying even more attention to the details. Catherine clearly needed to feel cared for, and he wanted to provide whatever comfort he could through his small gestures of service. As he wrapped her flowers in tissue paper, Marcus noticed that Catherine had selected sunflowers today instead of her usual mixed bouquet. Sunflowers had always reminded him of resilience, the way they turned their faces toward the light, no matter what storms they weathered. The choice seemed fitting for someone who was obviously facing challenges, but still trying to bring beauty into her life. Sunflowers are my favorite, Marcus said, as he carefully positioned them in her bag. They always seem so optimistic, the way they follow the sun across the sky. I needed some optimism today, Catherine admitted. Sometimes we need visual reminders that beauty persists, even when everything else feels uncertain. Marcus felt a deep recognition in Catherine's words. During his darkest moments after leaving the army, he had learned to look for small signs of beauty and hope, understanding that they could serve as anchors when everything else felt unstable. The total came to $29.16. Catherine handed him 2 20s, $40 even. As Marcus calculated her change, he found himself thinking about their conversation about resilience and new beginnings, about the strength it took to face unexpected challenges with grace. Quran. The 3rd time, Marcus made the choice that was becoming their ritual. Instead of giving Catherine the correct change of $10.84, he handed her $11.84, including an extra $1 with the rest of the money. Here's your change, he said quietly, meeting her eyes. With steady kindness, this time, Catherine didn't express surprise or protest about the extra money. Instead, she looked at Marcus with an expression that was grateful but also thoughtful, as if she was beginning to understand something important about his character and her own need for the kind of uncomplicated kindness he offered. "Thank you," Catherine said simply, but the words carried weight that acknowledged more than just the extra $1. "Your kindness has been exactly what I needed during a difficult time." "We all need to take care of each other," Marcus replied, "especially when life gets complicated." As Catherine gathered her bags, she found herself reluctant to leave. The conversation with Marcus had provided exactly the perspective she needed, reminding her that challenges could be opportunities for growth rather than just threats to be endured. His example of rebuilding his life with purpose and integrity gave her hope that she could weather whatever revelations were coming. "Marcus," Catherine said, then paused, as if making a decision about something important. "I want you to know that our conversations have meant a lot to me. You have a gift for seeing the best in people and helping them see it in themselves. Marcus felt touched by Catherine's words, recognizing that she was sharing something significant about her own experience. "I think we all have that capacity," he said. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of our own strength." Catherine nodded, understanding that Marcus was offering her exactly that reminder. As she turned to leave, she felt a resolve settling in her chest. Whatever challenges the newspaper story might bring, she would face them with the same dignity that Marcus had shown in rebuilding his own life. She had found genuine community in Seaside Grove, relationships based on authentic connection rather than social advantage, and she wouldn't let fear destroy what she had worked so hard to build. What Catherine didn't know was that even as she was walking to her car, determined to face her challenges with courage, the newspaper story was already being formatted for the next day's edition. The headline would read, "From Mansion to Main Street, David Lawson's ex-wife's dramatic lifestyle change," and it would include details about her modest cottage, her volunteer work, and even a photograph of her shopping at Miller's Market. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman whose resilience he had just encouraged was about to become the center of local media attention that would reveal secrets capable of changing everything between them. The careful anonymity that had allowed their friendship to develop naturally was about to be stripped away, replaced by revelations that would test whether genuine connection could survive the complications of real life. That evening, Catherine sat in her cottage garden as the sun set over the Pacific, Marcus's words about resilience and new beginnings echoing in her mind. She had decided not to let fear control her response to whatever publicity was coming. Instead, she would continue to live authentically, trusting that the relationships she had built in Seaside Grove were strong enough to withstand the revelation of her past. Marcus spent his evening walking on the beach, thinking about Catherine's obvious distress and hoping that whatever she was facing would resolve itself peacefully. He found himself caring about her well-being in ways that went beyond casual customer service, though he couldn't quite articulate why her happiness had begun to matter so much to him. Neither of them could have predicted that by tomorrow afternoon, everything they thought they knew about each other would be called into question, and their growing friendship would face its first real test. The simple routine of their grocery store encounters was about to become much more complicated, but it would also reveal depths of character in both of them that neither had fully recognized. The extra dollar that had become their ritual would soon represent something much larger than financial generosity. It would become a symbol of the choice between cynicism and trust, between protecting yourself from potential hurt and remaining open to the possibility of authentic connection despite life's inevitable complications. As both Catherine and Marcus fell asleep that night, they were thinking about their conversation and the comfort they had found in each other's understanding. Tomorrow would bring revelations that challenged everything they were beginning to believe about each other, but it would also provide opportunities to demonstrate the resilience and grace they had discussed, proving that sometimes the most meaningful relationships are forged not in easy times, but in moments when choosing trust requires real courage. Tuesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the coastal California weather was compensating for the storm about to break over Catherine's carefully constructed new life. She woke early, before her alarm, with the uneasy feeling that had become familiar whenever her past threatened to intrude on her present. The phone call from the reporter the day before had left her restless, but Marcus's words about resilience had given her strength to face whatever was coming. Catherine made coffee in her small kitchen, standing by the window that overlooked her garden, where morning glories climbed toward the early sunlight. The routine that had become sacred to her over the past months felt precious today, as if she was storing up these moments of peace against whatever disruption awaited her. She had learned during her divorce that scandal had its own momentum, beyond anyone's ability to control or contain. At Miller's Market, Marcus arrived for his shift with his usual punctuality, unaware that this would be the day everything changed between him and Catherine. He went through his morning routine of organizing his workspace, checking supplies, and mentally preparing for another day of serving customers who had become an extended community for him. The simple rhythm of his work had become a form of meditation, each transaction an opportunity to practice the values of service and kindness that gave his life meaning. Harold Patterson was already at work when Marcus arrived, restocking shelves with his methodical care. At 62, Harold had developed an intuitive sense about people and situations that came from decades of observation and experience. This morning, he seemed unusually attentive to the local newspaper that had been delivered with the store's supplies. "Morning, Marcus," Harold said, but there was something in his tone that suggested more than casual greeting. "Looks like it might be an interesting day." Marcus looked at Harold curiously, but before he could ask what he meant, Jennifer Walsh arrived for her shift, moving with her usual efficiency, but carrying herself with attention that suggested she had seen something that troubled her. The atmosphere in the store felt different this morning, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation that Marcus couldn't identify. Around 8:30, Owen Miller arrived at the store, earlier than his usual schedule. Owen was a man who valued privacy and discretion, qualities that had made Miller's Market a trusted part of the community for 3 generations. But this morning, he carried himself with the careful composure of someone preparing to manage a delicate situation. "Marcus," Owen said quietly, approaching the register area, "could I speak with you for a moment before we open?" Marcus followed, Owen to the small office behind the customer service desk, wondering what could be so important that it required a private conversation. Owen closed the door and gestured for Marcus to sit down, his expression serious but not unkind. "Marcus, I need to show you something that might affect one of our customers," Owen said, placing the morning edition of the Chronicle on the desk between them. "I want you to see this before the store gets busy, so you can be prepared if there are questions or complications." Marcus looked down at the newspaper and felt his world shift. The headline read, "From Mansion to Main Street, David Lawson's ex-wife's dramatic lifestyle change," and prominently featured was a photograph of Catherine shopping in their store. But the woman in the photograph wasn't just Catherine, the thoughtful, a customer who had become important to him. According to the article, she was Catherine Lawson, former wife of David Lawson, CEO of Lawson Industries, one of the most powerful business leaders on the West Coast. Marcus read the article with growing shock and confusion. It detailed Catherine's marriage to David Lawson, their high-profile divorce 6 months earlier, and her decision to walk away from a fortune to live modestly in Seaside Grove. The reporter had somehow obtained details about Catherine's cottage, her volunteer work, and even her shopping habits at local businesses. "The woman who's been coming here regularly," Marcus said slowly, looking up at Owen. "Catherine, she was married to David Lawson." "Apparently so," Owen said gently. "I wanted you to know before other people start talking about it. This kind of publicity can be difficult for everyone involved." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions that he struggled to process. Surprise, certainly, but also something that felt uncomfortably like betrayal. Catherine had presented herself as someone starting over with limited means, someone who appreciated his small gestures of extra change because every dollar mattered. If she was the ex-wife of a billionaire, what did that make of their interactions? Had she been amused by his attempts to help her financially? "Does this change anything about how we treat her as a customer?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Not at all," Owen said firmly. Catherine has been a valued customer, regardless of her background, and that doesn't change now. But Marcus, I know you've been particularly kind to her, and I wanted you to be aware of the situation before you heard about it from someone else." Marcus nodded, grateful for Owen's consideration, even as his mind reeled with questions and doubts. Everything he thought he knew about Catherine was suddenly cast in a different light. The careful way she counted money, the appreciation she showed for his kindness, the conversations about starting over and finding resilience in the face of challenges, all of it now seemed potentially dishonest. The store opened at 9, and Marcus went through the motions of his work while processing the revelation about Catherine's identity. Regular customers seemed to sense something different in his demeanor, the easy warmth that usually characterized his interactions replaced by a distracted politeness that got the job done but lacked his usual heart. Around 10:15, Maria Santos approached Marcus during a brief lull in customer traffic. Maria had a gift for reading people's emotional states, and she could see that Marcus was struggling with something significant. "You saw the newspaper article," Maria said quietly, not making it a question. Marcus nodded, unable to find words that adequately expressed his confusion and disappointment. "People have complicated stories, Marcus," Maria said gently. "Just because we learn new information about someone doesn't mean everything we thought we knew was false." "But she let me give her extra change," Marcus said, his voice carrying the hurt he was trying to suppress. "If she has access to millions of dollars, why would she accept money from someone making minimum wage?" Maria considered this carefully before responding. Maybe because the money wasn't what mattered to her, maybe it was the kindness behind the gesture that she needed. Marcus wanted to believe Maria's perspective, but the revelation had shaken his confidence in his ability to read people and situations. Military service had taught him to be suspicious of deception, and Catherine's omission of her true background felt like a fundamental dishonesty that called everything else into question. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. At 10:45, Catherine entered the store, moving with the same thoughtful pace Marcus had come to recognize, but carrying herself with visible anxiety. She had seen the newspaper article online, had watched her phone fill with calls from reporters and curiosity seekers, and had decided that hiding at home would only make the situation worse. Better to face the inevitable questions and reactions with dignity. Catherine noticed immediately that something was different in the store's atmosphere. Conversations seemed to pause as she passed, and she caught people looking at her with the mixture of curiosity and judgment that she remembered from the worst days of her divorce proceedings. The peaceful anonymity she had treasured in Seaside Grove was gone, replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that she was once again a subject of public speculation. She selected her items carefully, acutely aware that her every choice would now be analyzed and interpreted through the lens of her revealed identity. The simple pleasure she had found in grocery shopping had been complicated by the knowledge that even this mundane activity would be viewed as a performance rather than authentic living. When Catherine approached Marcus's register, she could see immediately that he had read the article. His usual warm greeting was replaced by polite but distant professionalism, and he avoided making eye contact as he began scanning her items. The easy connection they had developed over the past weeks had been replaced by a careful formality that broke Catherine's heart. "Good morning," Catherine said quietly, hoping to bridge the sudden distance between them. "Good morning," Marcus replied, his voice carrying none of the genuine warmth she had come to treasure. He scanned her items efficiently, but without his usual care, no longer taking time to protect her flowers or arrange her bags thoughtfully. Catherine watched Marcus work and felt the loss of their friendship like a physical pain. She realized how much his uncomplicated kindness had meant to her, how his genuine interest in her well-being had helped her believe that authentic relationships were possible. Now that easy connection was gone, replaced by the suspicious distance she had hoped to escape by moving to Seaside Grove. "Marcus," Catherine said softly, "I can see that you've learned about my background. I want you to know that I never meant to deceive you." Marcus looked up at her for the first time since she had approached his register, and Catherine saw hurt and confusion in his eyes that made her understand how deeply the revelation had affected him. "You were married to David Lawson," Marcus said, not making it a question. "You have access to more money than most people see in a lifetime." "I was married to David," Catherine confirmed, "but I walked away from that life 6 months ago. Everything I told you about starting over, about learning to cook for myself, about finding healing near the water, all of that was completely true." Marcus wanted to believe her, but the magnitude of what she had omitted made it difficult to trust anything else she had said. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? Why let me give you extra change when you could buy this entire store without thinking about it?" Catherine felt tears threaten, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "Because for the first time in 20 years, someone was treating me like a regular person instead of an extension of my husband's success. Your kindness wasn't about what I could do for you or who I was connected to. It was just genuine human compassion, and I needed that more than you can possibly understand." Marcus studied Catherine's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. Instead, he saw genuine pain and a vulnerability that seemed inconsistent with the image of a wealthy socialite playing games with working-class people. "The money you gave me," Catherine continued, "it wasn't about the dollar bills. It was about being seen and valued by someone who had no reason to be kind, except that kindness is who you are. That meant everything to me." Marcus finished scanning Catherine's items in silence, struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to believe her explanation, but another part felt foolish for being taken in by someone whose life was so different from his own. The total came to $26.37. Catherine handed him exact change, $26.37, no extra bills that would require him to make a decision about continuing their ritual. The gesture acknowledged that everything had changed between them, that the easy friendship they had been building was now complicated by revelations neither of them knew how to navigate. "Thank you," Catherine said quietly, as Marcus handed her the bags, his movements efficient but lacking the careful attention she had come to treasure. "Have a good day," Marcus replied, the phrase automatic and polite but empty of the genuine warmth that had characterized their previous interactions. Catherine walked away from Marcus's register, feeling like she had lost something precious and irreplaceable. The simple friendship that had been helping her heal from the wounds of her divorce was now another casualty of the publicity she had tried so hard to escape. As she left the store, she wondered if the authentic connections she had been building in Seaside Grove could survive the revelation of her past, or if she was destined to remain forever defined by her marriage to David Lawson. Marcus watched Catherine leave, his heart heavy with confusion and disappointment. The woman he had come to care about as a friend was not who he had thought she was, and he didn't know how to reconcile the Catherine he had known with the Catherine described in the newspaper article. The simple pleasure he had found in their interactions was now complicated by questions about authenticity and motivation that he couldn't answer. The rest of Marcus's shift passed in a blur of automatic customer service, his mind preoccupied with trying to understand what Catherine's deception meant about his judgment and his ability to trust his instincts about people. By the end of the day, he felt exhausted, not just from work, but from the emotional weight of having his faith in Human nature challenged by someone he had begun to care about. That evening, both Catherine and Marcus sat alone in their respective homes, replaying their uncomfortable interaction and wondering if the connection they had been building could survive the complications that Catherine's revealed identity had introduced. Neither of them knew that this crisis would ultimately test not just their friendship, but their individual capacity for forgiveness, understanding, and the courage to see beyond surface appearances to the authentic person underneath. The week following the newspaper revelation passed slowly for both Marcus and Catherine, each day marked by the absence of their comfortable routine and the weight of unresolved tension. Catherine continued her shopping at Miller's Market, unwilling to let fear drive her away from the community she had worked so hard to join. But the easy warmth of her interactions with Marcus had been replaced by polite but distant exchanges that left both of them feeling hollow. Marcus found himself dreading Catherine's visits while simultaneously hoping for them, torn between hurt over what he perceived as deception and a growing recognition that his reaction might have been unfair. During quiet moments at work, he replayed their conversations, looking for signs of manipulation he might have missed, but instead finding consistent evidence of someone genuinely struggling to rebuild her life with integrity and purpose. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected conversation that would begin to shift Marcus's perspective. Harold Patterson approached him during a lull in customer traffic, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the store's small cafe area and wearing the expression of someone who had something important to say. "Marcus," Harold said, settling onto the stool beside the register that employees use during breaks. "I've been watching you this week, and I think we need to talk." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, recognizing Harold's gesture as an invitation to a conversation that would probably challenge his thinking. Harold had a way of offering wisdom without judgment, and Marcus had learned to value his perspective. On complicated human situations, "You're struggling with the Catherine situation," Harold observed, not making it a question. "I feel like I don't know who she really is," Marcus admitted. "Everything she told me about her circumstances, about learning to cook for herself, about starting over with limited resources, it all feels like performance now that I know she could buy anything she wants." Harold sipped his coffee thoughtfully before responding. "Marcus, have you considered that maybe Catherine's financial situation isn't the most important truth about who she is?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that money doesn't change the fact that she's someone who helped an elderly man retrieve his dropped cane, or that she patiently waited when Maria needed extra help at the deli counter, or that she thanked every employee genuinely for their assistance," Harold said. "Those actions came from her character, not her bank account." Marcus considered this perspective, remembering his own observations of Catherine's consistent kindness toward other customers and store employees. Her behavior had always been considerate and authentic, regardless of whatever wealth she might have access to. "But why didn't she tell me the truth about her background?" Marcus asked. "Why let me think she needed financial help when she obviously doesn't?" Harold was quiet for a moment, looking out at the customers moving through the store with their various needs and struggles. "Marcus, what if Catherine needed something more valuable than money? What if she needed to be seen and valued for who she is rather than what she represents?" "I don't understand." "Think about it," Harold continued. "You've been treating Catherine with kindness and respect because you recognized her character, not because you wanted anything from her. Do you think that might be rare in her experience?" Marcus began to see Harold's point. If Catherine had been married to a prominent CEO, most of her interactions would have been colored by people's awareness of her status and wealth. His genuine kindness, offered without knowledge of her background, might have been exactly what she needed to believe in the possibility of authentic relationships. "The extra change you gave her," Harold said gently, "maybe that wasn't about the money at all. Maybe it was about being treated with simple human kindness by someone who had no ulterior motive. Marcus felt something shift in his chest as he considered Harold's words. He had been focused on the financial deception, but what if Catherine's real need had been for authentic connection rather than monetary assistance? What if his kindness had been valuable precisely because it was offered without awareness of her wealth? She said something like that when she tried to explain, Marcus admitted, but I was too hurt to really listen. Hurt because you felt deceived, or hurt because you thought your kindness had been wasted on someone who didn't need it? Harold asked. Marcus realized that his reaction had been more about wounded pride than genuine betrayal. He had felt foolish for offering financial help to someone with access to millions, but Catherine had never asked for money or manipulated him into giving it. His extra change had been freely offered based on his own impulse to be kind. Maybe I've been looking at this wrong, Marcus said slowly. Maybe you've been looking at it like someone who's been hurt before and learned to protect himself by being suspicious, Harold suggested. But Marcus, some people are worth the risk of trusting, even when the situation is complicated. That afternoon, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to Catherine when she came in for her regular shopping trip. She moved through the store with the same thoughtful consideration she had always shown, selecting items carefully and interacting politely with other customers and employees. But there was a sadness in her demeanor that hadn't been there before, a careful composure that suggested she was working hard to maintain her dignity in the face of unwelcome attention. Marcus noticed how other customers looked at Catherine now, some with curiosity, others with the kind of judgment that came from reading tabloid accounts of her divorce and lifestyle change. She handled the attention with grace, but Marcus could see the cost of constantly being observed and evaluated by people who thought they knew her story. When Catherine approached his register, Marcus felt the familiar tension that had characterized their interactions since the newspaper article. But this time, instead of focusing on his own hurt feelings, he tried to see the situation from Catherine's perspective. She was someone trying to build a new life while being constantly reminded of her past. Someone seeking authentic relationships while being defined by circumstances beyond her control. "Good afternoon, Catherine," Marcus said, making an effort to put genuine warmth into his voice. Catherine looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting the return of his previous friendliness. "Good afternoon, Marcus," she replied carefully, as if testing whether his change in tone was genuine. As Marcus scanned Catherine's items, he noticed that she had selected comfort foods today. Soup ingredients, fresh bread, ingredients for what looked like homemade cookies. Her choices suggested someone seeking solace in familiar routines and simple pleasures. "Making soup?" Marcus asked, trying to rebuild the easy conversation they had once shared. "Chicken and vegetable," Catherine confirmed, seeming pleased that he had asked. "It's my mother's recipe. I've been thinking about comfort food lately." Marcus understood the appeal of comfort food during difficult times. During his hardest months after leaving the army, he had often turned to simple, familiar meals that reminded him of better times and provided emotional as well as physical nourishment. "Homemade soup is one of life's great healers," Marcus said, carefully bagging her ingredients. "There's something about cooking that helps process difficult emotions." Catherine felt tears threaten at Marcus's understanding tone. She had missed their conversations more than she wanted to admit, and his return to genuine kindness felt like a gift she hadn't dared hope for. "It's been a challenging week," Catherine admitted. "I'm reminded of how much I value authentic relationships and how rare they can be." Marcus heard the vulnerability in Catherine's voice and realized how much courage it had taken for her to continue shopping at Miller's Market, despite the uncomfortable attention her revealed identity had brought. She could have driven to stores in other towns where she wasn't recognized, but instead she had chosen to face the situation with dignity. The total came to $34.18. Catherine handed Marcus exact change, continuing the pattern she had established since the newspaper article broke. She wasn't testing whether he would resume their ritual of extra change. She was respecting the distance his hurt had created between them. But as Marcus counted out her exact change, he found himself thinking about Harold's words about trust and the value of authentic kindness. Catherine had never asked him for extra money or manipulated him into giving it. His small gestures had been freely offered, and her appreciation had been genuine regardless of her financial circumstances. "Here's your change," Marcus said. But instead of handing Catherine the exact amount, he included an extra $1 with the bills. "Consider it an encouragement for getting through difficult times" gesture. Catherine looked down at the money in her palm, then back up at Marcus with an expression of such genuine gratitude that he felt ashamed of his previous coldness. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This means more to me than you know." "I know I've been distant this week," Marcus said, meeting her eyes directly. "I was hurt and confused, but I think I was being unfair to you." "You weren't being unfair," Catherine replied. "I understand why learning about my background was shocking. I should have been more honest about my situation from the beginning." Marcus shook his head. "You didn't owe me your life story, Catherine. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to justify your choices or explain your past." Catherine felt a weight lift from her chest that she hadn't realized she was carrying. Marcus's return to kindness and his acknowledgement that she didn't owe him explanations about her background meant more to her than any expensive gift ever had. "I want you to know that everything I told you about starting over and finding healing here was completely true," Catherine said. "The circumstances of my past don't change the fact that I'm trying to build something authentic and meaningful in Seaside Grove." "I believe you," Marcus said, and realized he meant it completely. "I think I was so focused on what you hadn't told me that I lost sight of everything you had shared that was genuine and important." As Catherine gathered her bags, she felt like something precious had been restored to her life. The friendship with Marcus that had been helping her heal was back, strengthened by having survived its first real test. "Marcus," Catherine said before turning to leave, "would you like to have coffee sometime, outside of work, I mean? I feel like we've been having conversations in fragments, and I'd enjoy the chance to talk without the interruption of customer service responsibilities." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest at Catherine's invitation. The idea of spending time with her away from the store, learning more about her story and sharing more of his own, felt both exciting and right. "I'd like that very much," Marcus said. "Are you free Saturday afternoon? There's a nice cafe near the harbor that I think you'd enjoy." "Saturday afternoon sounds perfect," Catherine replied, and her smile was the first genuinely happy expression Marcus had seen from her since the newspaper article had complicated everything between them. That evening, Marcus walked on the beach, as he often did when he needed to process complex emotions. The conversation with Harold had helped him understand that his reaction to Catherine's revealed background had been more about his own insecurities than any actual wrongdoing on her part. Catherine had been seeking authentic connection, and he had provided it without knowing her full story. The value of that connection wasn't diminished by learning about her wealth. If anything, it was made more precious by understanding how rare genuine kindness was in her experience. Catherine spent her evening making soup and thinking about the return of Marcus's friendship. His willingness to acknowledge his unfair reaction and resume their comfortable connection gave her hope that the relationships she was building in Seaside Grove could survive the complications of her past. More importantly, it reminded her that authentic people were willing to see beyond surface circumstances to the character underneath. Saturday afternoon would bring their first real conversation outside the structured environment of the grocery store, an opportunity to share their stories more completely and understand each other as whole people rather than customer and cashier. Both of them looked forward to the meeting with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, recognizing that their friendship was moving into new territory that would require honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to trust despite life's inevitable complications. The small gesture of resumed extra change had become a symbol of forgiveness and second chances, proof that authentic connections could survive misunderstanding and emerge stronger for having been tested. As both Marcus and Catherine fell asleep that night, they were thinking about the coffee date and the possibility that their friendship might deepen into something even more meaningful than either had dared to imagine. Saturday afternoon arrived, with the kind of perfect coastal weather that made Seaside Grove feel like a postcard. Catherine spent the morning tending her garden, using the familiar rhythm of watering and pruning to calm the nervous energy that had been building since she and Marcus had arranged their coffee meeting. This would be their first real conversation. Outside the structured environment of Miller's Market, an opportunity to share their stories more completely and understand each other as whole people rather than cashier and customer. Catherine chose her outfit carefully, wanting to look nice, without appearing to try too hard. She settled on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, clothes that felt authentically like herself rather than the carefully curated image she had maintained during her marriage to David. The simple act of choosing what to wear based on her own preferences rather than social expectations still felt liberating, even after 6 months of practicing this kind of freedom. Marcus spent his morning cleaning his small apartment and reviewing his own nervousness about the afternoon ahead. He had been attracted to Catherine from their first interactions, but learning about her background had complicated his feelings in ways he was still sorting through. Today's conversation would help him understand whether their connection could survive the revelation of their very different backgrounds, or whether the gap between their experiences was too wide to bridge. The Harbour Cafe sat at the end of Seaside, Grove's main pier, offering views of the Pacific Ocean that changed throughout the day as light and weather shifted across the water. Marcus arrived a few minutes early, choosing a corner table that provided privacy while still allowing them to enjoy the ocean vista. The cafe was popular with locals, but not crowded on Saturday afternoons, creating the kind of intimate atmosphere that encouraged genuine conversation. Catherine arrived precisely on time, moving through the cafe with the composed grace that Marcus had come to recognize. She looked beautiful, but approachable, and Marcus felt the familiar flutter of attraction combined with the deeper appreciation he had developed for her character during their grocery store interactions. "This is lovely," Catherine said, as she settled into her chair, looking out at the harbour where fishing boats and pleasure craft moved peacefully across the afternoon swells. "I've driven past this place dozens of times but never stopped in. It's one of my favourite spots in town," Marcus replied, grateful that Catherine seemed pleased with his choice. "The owner, Elena, makes the best coffee on the coast, and the view helps put everything in perspective." They ordered coffee and settled into the comfortable rhythm of conversation that had developed during their brief exchanges at Miller's Market. But today, without the pressure of other customers waiting or work responsibilities interrupting, they had the luxury of exploring topics more deeply. "Marcus," Catherine said after their coffee arrived, "I want to thank you for giving our friendship another chance. I know learning about my background was shocking, and I appreciate your willingness to see past the complications." "I owe you an apology," Marcus replied. "My reaction wasn't fair to you. I was so focused on what you hadn't told me that I lost sight of everything you had shared that was genuine and important." Catherine felt relief wash over her at Marcus's acknowledgement. "I understand why the revelation was difficult. In hindsight, I should have been more transparent about my situation from the beginning." "Why weren't you?" Marcus asked gently. "I'm not judging your choice. I'm genuinely curious about your reasoning." Catherine considered how to explain the complex emotions that had led to her secrecy. "For 20 years, every interaction I had was colored by people's awareness of my husband's wealth and status. Everyone wanted something from me, whether it was social access, business connections, or charitable donations. I never knew if people were responding to me or to what I represented." Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the isolation that Catherine's wealth had created. "That must have been incredibly lonely." "It was," Catherine confirmed. "When I moved to Seaside Grove, I had the opportunity to be seen for who I am, rather than who I was married to. Your kindness to me was so precious because it was offered without any knowledge of my background. You treated me with respect and care because you saw something in my character worth valuing." Marcus felt a shift in his understanding as Catherine explained her perspective. He had been hurt by her omission, but he was beginning to see that her secrecy had been about protecting something valuable rather than deceiving him. "The extra change you gave me," Catherine continued, "it wasn't about the money. It was about being treated with simple human kindness by someone who had no reason to be kind, except that kindness is who you are. That meant everything to me." "I think I understand better now," Marcus said. "You needed to know that connections could be authentic, even when circumstances are complicated." "Exactly," Catherine said, grateful that Marcus was willing to see the situation from her perspective. "I've been learning to trust my instincts about people again, to believe that genuine relationships are possible even when life is messy and complicated." Marcus found himself admiring Catherine's courage in starting over and her commitment to building authentic relationships despite the risks involved. "That takes tremendous strength," he said. "Starting over in a new place, especially when you're trying to escape public attention, that couldn't have been easy." Catherine appreciated Marcus's recognition of the challenges she had faced. "What about you?" she asked. "I know you mentioned military service, but I'd like to understand more about what brought you to Seaside Grove." Marcus had been anticipating this question, but still felt nervous about sharing the more difficult parts of his story. He had learned to be selective about how much he revealed to people, protecting himself from the discomfort that many civilians felt when confronted with the realities of military service and its aftermath. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan," Marcus began. "When I got out, the transition to civilian life was much harder than I expected. I struggled with feeling like my life lacked purpose and meaning." Catherine listened with complete attention, recognizing the vulnerability it took for Marcus to share his experiences. "That must have been incredibly difficult. The nightmares were the worst part," Marcus continued. "Not just from combat experiences, though those were certainly part of it, but from feeling like I no longer had a mission worth pursuing. In the military, every day carried weight and meaning. Back home, civilian life felt trivial and disconnected from anything that mattered." Catherine felt deep empathy for Marcus's struggle to find purpose after such profound service. "How did you find your way to Seaside Grove?" "I spent about a year drifting, trying different cities and jobs, but never feeling settled anywhere," Marcus explained. "I ended up here almost by accident, but something about the community and the ocean helped me start healing. The job at Miller's Market gave me what I needed most, the opportunity to serve others in small but meaningful ways." "That makes perfect sense," Catherine said. "I can see how customer service would appeal to someone with your understanding of service and your natural empathy for others." Marcus felt grateful for Catherine's understanding of his motivation. Many people saw retail work as beneath someone with his military experience, but Catherine recognized the deeper purpose it served in his life. Working at the store has taught me that you don't need grand gestures to make a positive impact, Marcus said. Sometimes the most meaningful service happens in ordinary moments, when you choose to see and respond to someone's needs. Catherine felt a deep resonance with Marcus's perspective. That's exactly what I've been learning through my volunteer work at the Literacy Center and the community garden. Real change happens through consistent small acts of care and attention. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the significance of what they had shared. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, its rhythmic movement creating a sense of continuity that made their personal revelations feel part of something larger and more permanent. "Catherine," Marcus said carefully, "can I ask about your marriage? You mentioned that learning to trust your instincts about people was something you had to relearn." Catherine had been expecting this question, but still felt a familiar tightness in her chest when her marriage became the topic of conversation. "David and I met when I was 24 and working as a social worker. He was charismatic and successful, and I was impressed by his ambition and confidence." Marcus listened without judgment, understanding that Catherine's willingness to share this part of her story was a gift of trust. "In the beginning, I thought we could build something extraordinary together," Catherine continued. "I tried to use my position as his wife to support meaningful causes, organizing charity events and serving on non-profit boards. But gradually, the demands of being a CEO's wife consumed more and more of my energy." "What changed?" Marcus asked gently. "I realized I had lost myself completely in trying to be the perfect corporate wife," Catherine said. "Every aspect of my life was designed to enhance David's success rather than express my own values or interests. When I discovered his affair, it was devastating not just because of the betrayal, but because it forced me to confront how little of myself was left." Marcus felt protective anger toward David Lawson for treating Catherine so carelessly, but he kept his focus on supporting Catherine's courage in sharing her story. "The divorce was brutal and public," Catherine continued. "David's legal team tried to minimize my settlement by portraying me as someone who had contributed nothing to his success. But I surprised everyone, including myself, by walking away from most of the money. I took enough to live modestly and start over, but I refused to fight for wealth that had never really been mine." "That must have taken incredible courage," Marcus said, genuinely impressed by Catherine's choice to prioritize authenticity over financial security. "It was terrifying," Catherine admitted, "but also liberating. For the first time in 20 years, I was making decisions based on my own values rather than someone else's expectations." Marcus understood exactly what Catherine meant about the terror and liberation of starting over. His transition from military to civilian life had involved similar challenges of rebuilding identity and purpose without familiar structures to rely on. "Moving to Seaside Grove was the best decision I ever made," Catherine said. "This community has given me the chance to rediscover who I am when I'm not defined by my relationship to someone else's success." "I'm glad you found your way here," Marcus said, meaning it completely. "The community is better for having you as part of it." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at Marcus's words. "I feel the same way about you. Your kindness and integrity make everyone around you feel valued and seen." As the afternoon light shifted across the harbor, creating patterns of gold and blue on the water, Marcus found himself feeling deeply grateful for Catherine's willingness to share her story and her understanding of his own journey. Their backgrounds were dramatically different, but their experiences of starting over and seeking authentic purpose had created a connection that transcended external circumstances. "Catherine," Marcus said, gathering courage for something he had been thinking about all week, "I want you to know that learning about your background doesn't change how I see you. If anything, it makes me admire your courage and authenticity. Even more, thank you. Catherine said, feeling tears threaten at the sincerity in Marcus's voice. "That means more to me than you can possibly know. Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Marcus asked, his heart beating faster as he made the invitation that would move their relationship into new territory. Nothing elaborate, just two people continuing to get to know each other better. Catherine felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. "I would love that," she said, without hesitation. "Next Saturday evening," Marcus suggested. "There's a small Italian restaurant downtown that serves the kind of comfort food that's perfect for deep conversations." "Saturday evening sounds perfect," Catherine agreed, already looking forward to spending more time with this thoughtful man who had seen past her complicated circumstances to value her authentic self. As they prepared to leave the cafe, both Marcus and Catherine felt that something significant had shifted between them. The honest sharing of their stories had deepened their connection, proving that authentic relationships could indeed survive the complications of real life when both people chose vulnerability over self-protection. Walking to their cars, they moved slowly, reluctant to end the afternoon that had restored their friendship and opened the possibility of something even more meaningful. The extra dollar that had started as simple kindness had evolved into a symbol of their capacity to see beyond surface circumstances to the character underneath, and both of them were eager to discover what other treasures their growing connection might reveal. The Italian restaurant Marcus had chosen, Nonna's Table, occupied a converted Victorian house 2 blocks from the ocean. Warm light spilled from its windows onto the quiet evening street, and the scent of garlic and fresh herbs created an atmosphere of comfort and intimacy that perfectly matched Marcus's intentions for their dinner together. Catherine arrived wearing a simple black dress that was elegant without being formal, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Marcus felt his breath catch when he saw her, struck again by how beautiful she was when she allowed herself to be genuinely relaxed and happy. "You look wonderful," Marcus said, meaning it completely as he held the restaurant door open for her. "Thank you," Catherine replied, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement that reminded her of first dates from decades ago, before her life had become complicated by wealth and social expectations. The restaurant's interior felt like dining in someone's beloved grandmother's home, with mismatched tables, family photographs on the walls, and the kind of worn but spotless comfort that spoke of decades of feeding people with love. The owner, Sophia, greeted Marcus warmly and led them to a corner table beside a window that offered glimpses of the ocean in the distance. Their conversation flowed even more easily than it had during their coffee meeting. Away from any reminders of their different backgrounds, they discovered shared interests in books, travel dreams, and the kind of deep questions about life's meaning that revealed compatible values and perspectives. Marcus told Catherine about his hopes to eventually start a non-profit organization helping other veterans transition to civilian life, while Catherine shared her dream of opening a literacy center that would serve the entire coastal community. As they talked, both realized they were falling in love, not with idealized versions of each other, but with the real people they had come to know through honest conversation and authentic connection. The attraction that had been building during their grocery store encounters was deepening into something much more significant. "Catherine," Marcus said during dessert, reaching across the table to take her hand, "I need you to know that being with you feels like coming home in a way I never expected to experience." "I feel the same way," Catherine replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "You make me feel seen and valued for who I really am, not for what I represent or what I can provide for someone else's dreams." When Marcus walked Catherine to her car after dinner, they both felt reluctant to end an evening that had confirmed what they had been hoping, that their connection was strong enough to support something lasting and meaningful. Standing beside her car under the coastal stars, Marcus gathered his courage for the conversation that would define their future. "Catherine," he said softly, "I'm falling in love with you. I know our circumstances are complicated, and I know there will be challenges we haven't even thought of yet, but I can't imagine my life without you in it." Catherine felt tears of joy prick her eyes as she heard Marcus voice exactly what she had been feeling. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said, "more than I thought was possible after everything I've been through." Their first kiss was gentle and full of promise, a moment that sealed their commitment to building something beautiful together, despite any obstacles their different backgrounds might create. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling with the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you've found something rare and precious. 6 months later, the announcement of Marcus Rodriguez and Catherine Lawson's engagement appeared in the Seaside Grove community newsletter rather than the society pages, reflecting their shared commitment to building a life focused on service rather than status. The engagement party was held at Miller's Market after hours, with the entire community invited to celebrate two people who had found love through simple kindness and authentic connection. Owen Miller gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Marcus and Catherine have shown us that the most beautiful love stories begin with people who see the best in each other and choose to nurture it every single day. They've proven that genuine connection can flourish when we have the courage to be ourselves completely. Harold Patterson, now considered the unofficial grandfather of the couple, shared the wisdom that had guided them through their early challenges. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections complement your own, someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. The wedding took place on the beach at sunset, with the entire Seaside Grove community in attendance. Catherine wore her grandmother's simple pearl necklace and a dress that was beautiful but unpretentious, while Marcus wore his dress military uniform, honoring the service that had shaped his character. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams while building something meaningful together. Maria Santos catered the reception with the same care she brought to the deli counter at Miller's Market. The community garden provided flowers for the decorations. Local musicians volunteered their talents for dancing under the stars. Everything about the celebration reflected the values that had brought Marcus and Catherine together: authenticity, community, and the belief that genuine love was worth more than any amount of wealth or status. Catherine's divorce settlement, which she had barely touched during her months of simple living in Seaside Grove, became the foundation for the Seaside Community Foundation, dedicated to supporting literacy programs, veteran services, and small business development throughout the coastal region. Marcus left his job at Miller's Market to become the foundation's executive director, finally finding the larger mission he had been seeking since leaving the army. The foundation's first major project was expanding Miller's Market into a community center that included meeting spaces for non-profits, a commercial kitchen for cooking classes, and a small library focused on resources for adult learners and veteran families. Owen Miller was delighted to see his family business evolve into something that served the community in even more meaningful ways. 2 years after their wedding, Marcus and Catherine welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Hope, recognizing that their love story was fundamentally about the power of hope to transform ordinary moments into extraordinary possibilities. Hope's nursery overlooked Catherine's garden, where sunflowers grew beside the vegetables that still provided simple pleasure and connection to the earth. Catherine continued to shop at Miller's Market, now managed by Jennifer Walsh, who had developed her own gift for customer service under Marcus's mentoring. The ritual of the extra dollar had evolved into the store's policy of small gestures of kindness for customers who seemed to need encouragement, creating a culture of care that attracted people from throughout the region. Marcus established a support group for veterans that met weekly at the community center, providing the kind of understanding and practical assistance he had needed during his own transition to civilian life. His combination of military experience and natural empathy made him uniquely qualified to help other veterans find purpose and healing in service to their communities. As their daughter grew, Marcus and Catherine would tell her the story of how they met, emphasizing the lessons that had guided their love, that kindness is always a choice, that authentic relationships require courage and vulnerability, and that the most meaningful life is built through service to others. The grocery store, where their love story began, remained the heart of their community involvement. Every Tuesday, Marcus would stop by to help stock shelves and catch up with old friends. Every Thursday, Catherine would volunteer at the literacy corner that had been added to the store's community space. And every time they shopped there together, they would remember the simple transaction that had changed both their lives forever. The extra dollar that Marcus had given Catherine during their first meaningful interaction was framed and hung in their kitchen, not as a symbol of financial generosity, but as a reminder that small acts of kindness create ripples of goodness that extend far beyond their immediate impact. Below the frame, they had written the words that had become their family motto. Sometimes, the smallest gestures create the biggest miracles. Their love story became legendary in Seaside Grove, not because of its dramatic elements, but because of what it proved about the power of authentic human connection. Visitors to the community often heard about the shy cashier who gave extra change, and the customer who turned out to be a billionaire's ex-wife. But locals always emphasized the real lesson, that genuine love flourishes when people choose to see the best in each other and have the courage to build something meaningful together. Years later, when young couples in Seaside Grove faced their own challenges with trust and connection, they would often be reminded of Marcus and Catherine's story as proof that authentic relationships could survive any complication when both people chose. Love over fear, understanding over judgment, and service over self-protection. As Marcus and Catherine grew old together, they never lost their appreciation for the simple miracle of being truly known and valued by another person. Their marriage became a testament to the truth they had discovered in a small grocery store, that the most extraordinary love stories begin with ordinary people who choose to treat each other with extraordinary kindness. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of love, resilience, and the power of simple kindness. Marcus and Catherine's story reminds us that sometimes the smallest gestures, like giving an extra dollar to a stranger, can change everything. Their love proves that authentic connections can flourish when we have the courage to see beyond appearances and choose compassion over judgment. If this story touched your heart and inspired you to believe in the transformative power of genuine human kindness, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder that beautiful love stories are still possible. Your support helps us continue creating content that celebrates the extraordinary potential hidden in ordinary moments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest inspirational stories. We're building a community of people who believe in the power of authenticity, service, and love to create positive change in the world. Join us as we continue to explore stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the incredible things that happen when we choose kindness over indifference. What small act of kindness could you perform today that might change someone's life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, you never know when your simple gesture of compassion might be exactly what someone needs to believe in love again. Until next time, keep spreading kindness and keep believing in the extraordinary power of ordinary moments.